Have you ever felt an overwhelming urge to stop, even when everything around you was telling you to keep moving? Maybe you brushed it off as stress. Maybe you called it a coincidence. But what if it wasn't? What if the reason you clicked on this video is because God has been trying to get your attention, and this is the moment you've finally chosen to listen? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear could change the direction of your life. There are moments when heaven interrupts our ordinary routine, moments when God whispers before he shouts. And if we ignore the whisper long enough, life itself can become loud enough to force us to stop. The question isn't whether God is speaking. The question is whether we're still listening. Right now, before you think about clicking away, take a deep breath and ask yourself one simple question. When was the last time I truly became still before God? Not while scrolling through my phone, not while worrying about tomorrow, not while rushing from one responsibility to another, but truly still. Because sometimes the greatest miracle isn't God changing your situation, it's God changing your heart while you're waiting. If this message is speaking to you already, take a moment to subscribe and write the word listening in the comments. It's more than a comment. It's a personal declaration that today you're choosing to hear God's voice above every distraction. And stay with me until the end, because one biblical truth could completely change how you see the silence you've been experiencing. We live in a world that celebrates constant movement, faster success, bigger achievements, endless notifications, endless noise. Every day we're told to keep pushing, keep producing, keep proving ourselves. But God's kingdom often works in the opposite direction. Before he moves you forward, he first calls you to be still. Psalm 46 tells us to be still and know that I am God. Notice that God didn't say be busy and know me. He said be still. Because stillness isn't weakness. Stillness is where faith begins to hear what fear has been trying to drown out. Think about the story of Elijah. After witnessing incredible miracles, he found himself exhausted, discouraged, and running for his life. He expected God to appear through dramatic signs. A powerful wind tore through the mountains, an earthquake shook the ground, fire blazed before him. But God wasn't in any of those. Finally, there came a gentle whisper. That's where God spoke. How often are we looking for loud answers while ignoring God's quiet voice? Sometimes we're asking for a miracle while God is waiting for us to pause long enough to hear his next instruction. Maybe that's exactly where you are today. You've been praying, but heaven feels silent. You've been asking, but no answer seems to come. Yet, what if his silence isn't rejection? What if it's preparation? Every farmer knows that seeds grow underground long before anyone sees the harvest. Just because you can't see movement doesn't mean nothing is happening. God often does his deepest work in places hidden from human eyes. There are blessings that can only be trusted to someone who has learned patience. There are doors that only open after you've developed the character to walk through them. Sometimes the delay you're fighting is actually God's protection. Imagine receiving everything you've prayed for before your heart was ready to handle it. What feels like waiting could actually be mercy. Remember Moses. Before leading millions of people, he spent 40 years in the wilderness. Those years probably looked wasted from a human perspective. But God never wastes seasons. The wilderness became the classroom where Moses learned humility, dependence, and obedience. Without those hidden years, he couldn't have carried the weight of his calling. The same pattern appears throughout Scripture. Joseph spent years as a servant and prisoner before becoming a ruler. David was anointed king long before he wore the crown. Even Jesus spent 30 quiet years preparing for a ministry that lasted only about 3 years. Heaven values preparation more than speed. So why do we become so uncomfortable with stopping? Because stopping forces us to face what's inside us. When the distractions disappear, we finally hear our fears, our doubts, our disappointments, and our questions. But that's also where God meets us. Not when we're pretending to have everything together, but when we honestly admit we need him. Perhaps God has been asking you to slow down because you're chasing things that can never satisfy your soul. Maybe you've been searching for peace and success, relationships, approval. Yet none of those were ever designed to replace God's presence. Augustine once wrote that our hearts remain restless until they rest in God. That truth is just as real today. Sometimes God's command to stop isn't punishment. It's an invitation. An invitation to leave anxiety behind. An invitation to release control. An invitation to trust Him with the future you can't see. Because faith isn't knowing every step ahead. Faith is trusting the one who already knows the destination. But here's what makes this so important. There is one mistake almost everyone makes when God tells them to stop, and it has kept countless people from receiving the breakthrough they were closer to than they ever imagined. In the next part, we'll uncover that mistake, and once you understand it, you'll never look at God's timing the same way again. The mistake is surprisingly simple, yet incredibly dangerous. When God tells us to stop, we assume He has abandoned us. Mistake His pause for His absence. We believe that because we can't see Him moving, He must not be working. But throughout the Bible, God's greatest miracles often began in seasons that looked completely silent. Silence has never meant God stopped caring. It often means He is arranging things that only He can see. Imagine standing in front of a massive tapestry. From the back, all you see are tangled threads, loose ends, and what appears to be complete chaos. It doesn't make sense, but when you move to the front, every thread forms a beautiful masterpiece. That's what life often looks like from our perspective. We see confusion. God sees completion. We see delays. God sees perfect timing. We see closed doors. God sees dangers we never even knew existed. There are prayers you've prayed that God answered with "not yet," because He loves you too much to give you something at the wrong time. Times you've looked back and realized that what once felt like disappointment actually became protection. The relationship that ended. The opportunity that disappeared. The job you didn't get. At the time it hurt, but later you understood that God's hand was guiding you away from something that would have pulled you away from His purpose. That is why trusting God requires more than believing He exists. It requires believing that His heart is good, even when His plan doesn't make sense. Proverbs reminds us to trust in the Lord with all our heart, and not rely only on our own understanding. Why? Because our understanding is limited. We only see today. God sees every tomorrow. Think about Peter walking on the water. The miracle didn't happen because the storm disappeared. The storm was still raging, the waves were still crashing, the wind was still strong. The miracle happened because Peter fixed his eyes on Jesus. The moment he shifted his focus to the storm, fear took over and he began to sink. Isn't that exactly what happens to us? When we focus only on the problems, anxiety grows louder than faith. But when our eyes return to Christ, peace begins to replace panic. Maybe today your storm is financial pressure. Maybe it's loneliness. Maybe it's a broken family, an illness, or an unanswered prayer that has lasted for years. You may feel like giving up because nothing seems to be changing. But remember this, God's promises are not canceled by difficult seasons. Winter never stops spring from coming. Night never prevents the sunrise. And your current struggle cannot stop God's purpose for your life. The enemy wants you to believe that your story is over. He whispers that you'll never recover, never heal, never succeed, never experience joy again. But God's voice says something completely different. He says that He is close to the brokenhearted. He says He works all things together for the good of those who love Him. Good of those who love Him. He says that His grace is sufficient, and His strength is made perfect in weakness. Those aren't empty words. They are promises spoken by a God who has never broken a single one. Sometimes God says stop, because He wants to rescue you from running toward exhaustion instead of purpose. You don't have to carry every burden alone. You don't have to solve every problem overnight. Jesus invited the weary and burdened to come to Him, not after they had everything figured out, but exactly as they were. The world tells you to be stronger. Jesus tells you to come closer. What if this very moment is your invitation? What if God has been slowing your plans so He could save your soul from unnecessary pain? What if the waiting season is preparing you for an answer so much greater than anything you imagined? When Joseph sat in prison, he had no idea that he was only one day away from standing before Pharaoh. Morning changed everything. That's how quickly God can transform a situation. The breakthrough you've been praying for may arrive in a way you never expected. But whether your miracle comes tomorrow or months from now, don't let your faith depend only on visible results. Mature faith trusts God before the answer arrives. It praises Him before the victory. It worships Him before the healing. Because faith isn't based on circumstances, it's based on the unchanging character of God. So today, if you feel God saying, "Stop," don't be afraid. Stop chasing things that drain your soul. Stop believing every lie that tells you you're forgotten. Stop measuring God's love by your current circumstances. Stop letting fear make decisions that only faith should make. Instead, stop, breathe, pray, listen, and trust. One quiet moment in God's presence can accomplish what years of striving never could. His peace can calm the storm inside you, even before He calms the storm around you. And when His timing finally unfolds, you'll realize that every delay, every tear, every unanswered question was leading you exactly where you needed to be. So before this video ends, I want you to remember one sentence. When God says stop, it's never because He's finished with you. It's because He's preparing you for something greater than you can see. Hold on to that truth the next time life feels uncertain. Let it strengthen you when fear tries to take over. Let it remind you that the God who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it. If this message encouraged your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more faith-filled messages that will strengthen your walk with God. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that God's silence is not His absence. And in the comments, write "I will listen" as your declaration that from this day forward, you'll choose to trust God's voice over your fears.